and enjoyed as sweet sleep as perhaps is ever found on beds of down. In another corner some rude shelves were placed, upon which appeared a few articles of tin and ironware. Upon some buck horns over the door was always placed the rifle, ever loaded and ready for use. A very intelligent emigrant, Dr. Doddridge, gives the following graphic account of his experience in such a log cabin as we have described, in the remote wilderness. When he was but a child, his father, with a small family, had penetrated these trackless wilds, and in the midst of their sublime solitude had reared his lonely cabin. He writes: "My father's family was small, and he took us all with him. The Indian meal which he brought was expended 6 weeks too soon, so that for that length of time we had to live without bread. The lean venison and the breast of wild turkeys we were taught to call bread. I remember how narrowly we children watched the growth of the potato tops, pumpkin and squash vines, hoping from day to day to get something to answer in the place of bread. How delicious was the taste of the young potatoes when we got them! What a jubilee when we were permitted to pull the young corn for roasting ears! Still more so when it had acquired sufficient hardness to be made into Johnny cake by the aid of a tin grater. The furniture of the table consisted of a few pewter dishes, plates, and spoons, but mostly of wooden bowls, and trenchers and noggins. If these last were scarce, gourds and hard shell squashes made up the deficiency. I well remember the first time I ever saw a teacup and saucer. My mother died when I was 6 or 7 years of age. My father then sent me to Maryland to go to school. At Bedford, the tavern at which my uncle put up was a stone house, and to make the changes still more complete, it was plastered on the inside both as to the walls and ceiling. On going into the dining room, I was struck with astonishment at the appearance of the house. I had no idea that there was any house in the world that was not built of logs. But here I looked around and could see no logs, and above I could see no joists. Whether such a thing had been made by the hands of man, or had grown so of itself, I could not conjecture. I had not the courage to inquire anything about it. When supper came on, my confusion was worse confounded. A little cup stood in a bigger one, with some brownish looking stuff in it, which was neither milk, hominy, nor broth. What to do with these little cups, and the spoons belonging to them, I could not tell, but I was afraid to ask anything concerning the use of them. Daniel Boone could see from the door of his cabin, far away in the west, the majestic ridge of the Alleghany Mountains, many of the peaks rising 6,000 feet into the clouds. This almost impassable wall, which nature had reared, extended for hundreds of leagues along the Atlantic coast, parallel with that coast, and at an average distance of 130 miles from the ocean. It divides the waters which flow into the Atlantic from those which run into the Mississippi. The great chain consists of many spurs from 50 to 200 miles in breadth, and receives in different localities different names, such as the Cumberland Mountains, the Blue Ridge, etc. But few white men had ever as yet ascended these summits, to cast a glance at the vast wilderness beyond. The wildest stories were told around the cabin fires of these unexplored realms, of the Indian tribes wandering there, of the forests filled with game, of the rivers alive with fishes, of the fertile plains, the floral beauty, the abounding fruit, and the almost celestial clime. These stories were brought to the settlers in the broken language of the Indians, and in the exaggerated tales of hunters, who professed that in the chase they had, from some Pisgah's summit, gazed upon the splendors of this Canaan of the New World. Thus far the settlers had rested contented with the seaboard region east of the Alleghanies. They had made no attempt to climb the summits of this great barrier, or to penetrate its gloomy defiles. A dense forest covered alike the mountain cliff and the rocky gorge. Indeed, there were but few points at which even the foot of the hunter could pass this chain. While Daniel Boone was residing in the congenial solitude of his hut on the banks of the Yadkin, with the grandeur of the wilderness all around him, in which his soul delighted, with his table luxuriously spread according to his tastes, with venison, bear's meat, fat turkeys, chickens from the prairie, and vegetables from his garden; with comfortable clothing of deerskin, and such cloths as peddlers occasionally brought to his cabin door in exchange for furs, he was quite annoyed by the arrival of a number of Scotch families in his region, bringing with them customs and fashions which to Daniel Boone were very annoying. They began to cut down the glorious old forest, to break up the green sward of the prairies, to rear more ambitious houses than the humble home of the pioneer. They assumed airs of superiority, introduced more artificial styles of living, and brought in the hitherto unknown vexation of taxes. One can easily imagine how restive such a man as Boone must have been under such innovations. The sheriff made his appearance in the lonely hut. The collection of the taxes was enforced by suits at law. Even Daniel Boone's title to his lands was called in question, some of the newcomers claiming that their more legal grants lapped over upon the boundaries which Boone claimed. Under these circumstances our pioneer became very anxious to escape from these vexations by an emigration farther into the wilderness. Day after day he cast wistful glances upon the vast mountain barrier piercing the clouds in the distant horizon. Beyond that barrier neither the sheriff nor the tax gatherer were to be encountered. His soul, naturally incapable of fear, experienced no dread and apprehension of Indian hostilities or the ferocity of wild beasts. Even the idea of the journey through the sublime solitudes of an unexplored region was far more attractive to him than the tour of Europe to a sated millionaire. 2 or 3 horses would convey upon their backs all their household goods. There were Indian trails and streets, so called, made by the buffaloes, as in large numbers they had followed each other, selecting by a wonderful instinct their path from one feeding ground to another, through cane brakes, around morasses, and over mountains through the most accessible defiles. Along these trails or streets Boone could take his peaceful route without any danger of mistaking his way. Every mile would be opening to him new scenes of grandeur and beauty. Should night come, or a storm set in, a few hours' labor with his axe would rear for him not only a comfortable but cheerful tent with its warm and sheltered interior, with the camp fire crackling and blazing before it. His wife and children not only afforded him all the society his peculiar nature craved, but each one was a helper, knowing exactly what to do in this picnic excursion through the wilderness. Wherever he might stop for the night, or for a few days, his unerring rifle procured for him viands which might tempt the appetite of the epicure. There are many even in civilized life who will confess that for them such an excursion would present attractions such as are not to be found in the banqueting halls at Windsor Castle or in the gorgeous saloons of Versailles. Daniel Boone, in imagination, was incessantly visiting the land beyond the mountains, and longing to explore its mysteries. Whether he would find the ocean there, or an expanse of lakes and majestic rivers, or boundless prairies, or the unbroken forest, he knew not. Whether the region were crowded with Indians, and if so, whether they would be found friendly or hostile, and whether game roamed there in greater variety and in larger abundance than on the Atlantic side of the Great Barrier, were questions as yet all unsolved. But these questions Daniel Boone pondered in silence night and day. A gentleman who nearly half a century ago visited one of these frontier dwellings, very romantically situated amidst the mountains of West Virginia, has given us a pencil sketch of the habitation which we here introduce. The account of the visit is also so graphic that we cannot improve it by giving it any language but its own. This settler had passed through the first and was entering upon the second stage of pioneer life. Towards the close of an autumnal day, when traveling through the thinly settled region of western Virginia, I came up with a substantial looking farmer leaning on the fence by the roadside. I accompanied him to his house to spend the night. It was a log dwelling, and near it stood another log structure, about 12 feet square, the weaving shop of the family. On entering the dwelling, I found the numerous household all clothed in substantial garments of their own manufacture. The floor was unadorned by a carpet, and the room